evening again. It's time for chapter 4. It looks like chapter 4 is going to be a little thicker. At least it feels a little more substantial in my hand. A little news. The cover might be ready by the time for A Season of Wolves before I finish reading to the end of Ashes in Winter. I might even read a sneak peek of A Season of Wolves. Keep in mind that if I do, it is completely unedited at this point. So what I read may change a little bit. And you know what? In the interest of this feeling so for real, if my family happens to come in, I'm not even going to stop recording. I'm just going to roll with it. Maybe even introduce you to a member of my family or two, if they wander in. So let's start with chapter 4. So in the last chapter, we started to see how things were starting to fall apart a bit and get into the action and adventure part of this. We're going to continue with that as we return to Gina. Chapter 4. Vince brought Gina a coffee and sat down beside her. The dining room and table in their house had a large picture window overlooking the lake. The view was often spectacular, especially in the autumn, when the leaves changed to fiery reds and oranges and reflected off the lake. "Are the emergency channels all still down?" asked Vince, and Gina nodded. "That's not good." "No, you're right there. Makes me wonder what's happened. I've got a gut feeling winter's going to be far worse than we're used to, and this is only the start of our problems." A shiver started at the base of her spine before running up her back like electric fire. I got a real bad feeling something's going to happen this winter. What type of thing? Now I'm having issues turning pages. Dry pages, dry fingers do not make for turning pages real easy. "I don't really know. The land feels wrong. It feels like it's in pain. Oh, I can't describe it." She put a palm on the window overlooking Middle Lake. Vince's eyes never left her. "Well, I hope it gets feeling better." "So do I." She took a sip of coffee and pushed away from the window. "The emergency network really worries me, though. It's supposed to survive cold weather. I've tried ringing the station captain, but the station phones are down and the radio's just not picking up anything. I can't get in touch with even the lieutenant through his mobile. I don't know what's happened. I'm sure we'll find out soon. Can't help but wonder if some of my neighbors are safe, wherever they are," she thought. She liked them, if she had to be honest, from a distance, but she still cared enough to be concerned over their welfare. "So, circling back to the emergency line still being down," said Vincent, and Gina fought to keep herself from rolling her eyes. "How long has it been?" "Too long. But I can't get in touch with anyone to find out what's going on. I really don't think smoke signals or mirrors are going to work," she added, earning a light-hearted snigger from Vince. They both fell into silence after that. "What the hell?" "There are people on the lake," said Vincent. Gina crinkled her brow. "People?" She looked up, widening her eyesight to take in the lake before her. Vincent pointed across the lake. Gina blew out her breath as she saw 2 snow machines heading from across the other subdivision on the other side of Middle Lake and across the lake to them. "Is it me, or does something feel wrong about this?" asked Vincent, and he shrugged. "Correct me if I'm just jumpy as hell, though." "No, you're not wrong. I've got the same feeling," she replied as she got up from the table. Gina checked her weapon and headed down the now cleared driveway as the first person stepped foot on land. The first snow machine stopped, and the man waved, and she blew out a breath in relief. "Relax, Vincent, it's just Paul," said Gina as she removed her hand from the holster on her hip as she waved back at him. "I'll go check out what he's come to see us about. Maybe he knows something that we don't." By the time Gina walked down the length of the driveway and to the road, Paul had ridden across another neighbor's yard and to the road to meet her. "Gina, it's good to see you," he said as he held out his hand to her. "You as well," answered Gina as she shook his hand. "I'm trying to reserve my gas for important trips," he answered, climbing off the snow machine, and he hopped up and down to keep warm. "No offense, but it's colder than hell out here. Could we talk somewhere warmer?" "Yeah, come inside and have a cuppa with us." She nodded and swung around behind him on a snow machine as they rode up the hill to the house. As she climbed off, rubbing her face to get the blood circulating, as even the quick trip had whipped the freezing cold air against her face, he killed the engine. She led the two men from their snow machines into the house, and Paul removed his helmet. "Much nicer in here," he said. With a snort, Gina nodded over at Vincent. As Vincent made a fresh round of coffee, the two men stripped off their sledding gear and hung it so that any snow would melt off, but not leave it soaking by the time they had to get back into it. Gina handed them both a set of slippers, and they joined her in her dining room. "Thanks for the hospitality, Gina. Vince, this is Noah." Paul introduced his companion as he accepted the coffee from Vince. "Have you heard anything?" asked Noah. Gina shook her head. "Not a word." The two men looked at each other. "Nothing?" asked Paul, his eyebrows rising. "Not anything?" "Not even static, Paul," answered Gina. Paul blew out a breath and leaned back in his chair. "That shouldn't even be possible." "I know. I've tried everything I can think of. I've radioed the station, I've radioed the water bomber's base, I've even tried calling my lieutenant on his mobile. I get nothing from the radios, and the message keeps saying the mobile service is out of service, and they hope to bring it back online soon." She turned even more serious. "And our power is limited. I don't know how long it'll continue for without degrading either further." "Yeah, we noticed the same thing with the power. Now what?" he asked. Gina shook her head. "The best I can figure is that we just survive. Maybe it comes back. Maybe it doesn't. But I'm not about to roll over and just give up because my radio died and my heater stopped working. That's why we've got a fire." "She has a point," mentioned Noah, as he also sighed. "And those of us with fires can house those who don't. Keep everyone warm." They stood up. "No point in worrying about it now." Gina blew out a breath. "Better to look forward and survive it, me and everyone here. So if we're about done talking let's just get it done," she thought before she said. "I'll get Vince to continue monitoring the channels. If it comes back on, he can tell me. In the meantime, I think we should turn our focus into just how we are going to survive the winter." Paul's eyebrows rose again. "Okay, we'll follow your lead on this. What's your next step, then?" "First, we're going to be working together. A lot on this," she pointed out, and she pointed towards the lake that they could see through the window beside her entry door. "We need a way back and forth across the lake that isn't relying on gas-burning snow machines or vehicles. The easiest way would be to use one run of gas right now to clear off and pack down what we can in the way of a path between the two sides of the lake." "I think I see where you're going with this," Paul nodded. "Okay. What about what the others think?" asked Vincent. "I know we're not panicking and that we have a focus. What about the others? Won't they ask why?" "If they can clear a skate path on Lake Ramsey every year for funsies, then we can do it here and say it's for the same reason," said Gina. "And why the hell not? Skating on the lake and getting the ice huts back on it will give us all a sense of normalcy we'd be lacking if we didn't. Not to mention the fish we might catch from the lake may be our only and best source of food for a while," said Paul. "No, we'd fish it out too fast, assuming we caught enough in the first place," Gina answered, but she pointed her thumb behind her. "However, there's another lake close to here that can be reached easily enough. Might even find a few other survivors capable of helping us out while we do the same for them. Bigger lake, more likely to have fish." "Can't survive on fish all winter," said Noah. "We'd fish out both lakes." "There's small game," said Vincent. "Maybe a little gamey, but we've always had rabbits and jackrabbits in the area. There's lots of bush tea as well to avoid scurvy. It won't be easy, but we can survive." "Might be worthwhile taking a chance at Walmart, too," said Gina, but then she sighed. "Not that I want to. If things are falling apart in the city like I suspect they could be, that is the first place anyone is going to head, assuming it hasn't already been looted." Paul took in a deep breath before releasing it. "You really think that's happened?" "I have no idea," answered Gina, "but I've also never lost my radio and server connection for so long before. Maybe once we're over that hill, all will be normal and all, and I hope so. And this is just an exercise in emergency preparedness." "We could check it out," suggested Paul, and Gina felt her eyebrows raise. "From a distance. If it looks normal, then we know we're just jumping at shadows. If things look off, we know what we're up against." Gina nodded. That's a good idea. Paul nodded to his friend. Okay, Gina, get suited up. You can ride with me across the lake, and then we can each take one of my machines up the hill and see what's going on. Paul and Noah went outside, and Vincent grabbed Gina's arm as she was getting into her snow gear. What do you really think? Are you just overreacting? Gina shook her head. I hope so, but I don't know. Can't hurt to hope. Never hurts to hope, agreed Vincent. Needed a little sip of water for that. Swinging back to Garrett now. Garrett yawned and pushed open the flap to the tent, one hand scratching the back of his head and the other holding back a second yawn. He grinned. The sky was a shade darker than periwinkle, and the east was a fading purple and pink. Not a true red sky in the morning, but it still boded well. With how clear it was, it meant no more snow for at least a few days. The problem was how cold it was likely to be. More like frozen. Enough to break even toughened plastic like brittle glass. He blew into the ashes of the fire and fed it a few bits and pieces of branches and wood chips until it returned to a cheery fire. No use wasting a good fire. May as well make some proper tea, he thought, or warm up a bit while packing everything up again. Tea and breakfast consumed, Garrett fed the fire more wood and stoked it to an aggressive and good-sized fire. He wouldn't have done this while breaking down camp in the summer. There wouldn't have been a need for it, and the chances of it jumping from fire pit to bush were too great. However, in the winter, everything was soaked and frozen. He would need the fire to keep himself warm and to dry off again, perhaps even cook food. He returned to the truck and swore. 4x4 or not, there was no using it. It started fine, but now the snow was too deep to gain any purchase. With no sign of any traffic or even tracks in the snow at all, that meant no chance of rescue. Snowed enough even to erase my tracks. Garrett sighed again and reached into the truck to try the satellite again. The blizzard was too heavy for a signal. It's like that at camp with the damn TV, too. Garrett turned the phone on and waited for acknowledgement of the signal. While it turned on and the screen showed he had a connection to a satellite, there was no connection from the satellite to the other side. It was like the service provider had vanished. Garrett blinked and looked up, and he forced himself to remain calm. He knew enough. No service on a satellite phone. The network was down on a network that never went down. It was impossible, but yet there it was. Well, I guess that leaves it up to me to get myself out of this mess, he said aloud, and then he sighed. So what have we got? Garrett opened the back of the truck and rooted around the back and then laughed. Half of it was nervous tension, but the rest was relief. Snowshoes. Where the hell were you last night when I could have used you, eh? He grumbled. Would have saved me the soakers. He leaned against the truck and strapped the titanium-framed heavy-duty snowshoes to his boots, testing them on the snow. Now that he wasn't sinking to mid-thigh, it had snowed that much between last night and this morning. He was drier, warmer, and using less energy to just get around. He took the travel and survival pack out of the truck and packed it full with every bit he would need, including some personal items. He tromped back around to the remains of his camp, dousing the fire, and even strapped some kindling to his back. There were a few saplings around the camp, and he found one that was promising. He tested the 6-foot sapling the width of 3 of his fingers in his hands, and with a nod, after chopping it down, used it as a walking pole to keep himself steady. With one last look at the camp, he returned to the truck and made sure there was nothing else he would need from it. Ooh, what happened to the focus? It just suddenly went out of focus. That's better. I have no idea what happened there. For some reason, my camera decided it was going to go and stop recording. I think I managed to find where it stopped recording, so I'm going to back up. which thankfully it wasn't very far into the reading on the part about Garrett, because we're flipping back to Garrett now. I'm going to take a little sip of water. Because reading makes your throat dry. And we're going to continue. Garrett yawned and pushed open the flap to the tent, one hand scratching the back of his head and the other holding back a second yawn. He grinned. The sky was a shade darker than periwinkle, and the east was a fading purple and pink. Not quite a true red sky in the morning, but it still boded well. With how clear it was, it meant no more snow for at least a few days. The problem was how cold it would be. More like frozen. Enough to break even toughened plastic like brittle glass. He blew into the ashes of the fire and fed it a few bits and pieces of branches and wood chips until it returned to a cheery blaze. No use wasting a good fire. May as well make some proper tea, he thought. Or warm up a bit while packing everything up again. Tea and breakfast consumed, Garrett fed the fire more wood and stoked it to an aggressive and good-sized blaze. He wouldn't have done this while breaking down camp in the summer. There wouldn't have been a need for it, and the chance of it jumping from fire pit to bush would have been too great. However, in the winter, everything was soaked and frozen. He would need the fire to keep himself warm and to dry off again, perhaps even cook food. He returned to the truck and then swore. 4x4 or not, there was no using it. It started fine, but now the snow was too deep to gain any purchase. With no sign of any traffic or even tracks in the snow at all, that meant no chance of rescue. It snowed enough even to erase my tracks. Garrett sighed again and reached into the truck to try the satellite. The blizzard was too heavy for a signal. It's like at camp with that damn TV, too. Garrett turned the phone on and waited for the acknowledgement of the signal. While it turned on and the screen showed that he had a connection to the satellite, there was no connection from that satellite to the other side. It was like the service provider had vanished. Garrett blinked and looked up, and he forced himself to remain calm. He knew enough. No service on a satellite phone. The network was down on a network. That never went down. It was impossible. But yet, there it was. Well, I guess that leaves it to me to get myself out of this mess, he said aloud, and then he sighed. So, what have we got? Garrett opened the back of the truck and rooted around the back and then laughed. Half of it was nervous tension, but the rest was relief. Snowshoes. Where the hell were you last night when I could have used you, eh? He grumbled. That would have saved me the soakers. He leaned against a truck and strapped the titanium-framed heavy-duty snowshoes to his boots, testing them on the snow. Now that he wasn't sinking to mid-thigh, it had snowed that much between last night and this morning. He was drier, warmer, and using less energy to just get around. He took the travel and survival pack out of the truck and packed it full of every bit he would need, including some personal items. He tromped back around to the remains of his camps, dousing the fire and strapping some kindling onto his back. There were a few saplings around the camp, and he found one that was promising. He tested the 6-foot sapling the width of 3 of his fingers in his hand, and with a nod, after chopping it down, used it as a walking pole to keep himself steady. With one last look at the camp, he returned to the truck and made sure there was nothing else he would need from it. He half considered leaving the useless satellite phone and charger, but then grabbed it anyway. It may be too much to hope for the service to come back, he thought, but I will hope for it anyway. Garrett paused, his thumb on the lock button of the key fob of the truck. He breathed in and then let his breath out again, pressing it. A lonely beep beep told him the truck was locked. The trees and bush pushing in on the other side of the road eventually thinned as Garrett walked down the hill. In the middle of a snow-covered field in the valley was a stone bridge, all that remained of old Worthington. A long time ago, back when the mining in the area was new and during the copper and nickel rush, the mine beneath Worthington gave way. Within minutes, most of the town sank into the sinkhole created by the collapsing mine. The only reason no one had died was because of a mine supervisor noticing some unusual shifting in the rock within the mine and ordering an immediate evacuation. All that remained now was a water-filled crevice in the resulting crater, and the lonely bridge as a reminder. The road skirted the edge of this swamp, built into the side of the rock where the builders would could at least count on solid ground for the semis, smaller trucks, and cars to travel between Fairbanks Lake and the major highway. Close to here was a newer part of the town, although it was not really a town, not anymore. A small clumping of houses and farmland, that was all that remained of Worthington. It was a small subdivision, and it only had as many houses as he had fingers on his hands. He liked it up here for much the same reason these few bought their homes here. It was quiet. Garrett stopped, breathing hard after climbing from the valley. Sweat was rolling down his back despite the freezing temperatures. I've overexerted myself, he thought. Shouldn't have pushed. Could have set up camp on the other side of that valley. He looked from house to house. There was a sense like someone had fingers on the back of his neck, but each time he looked at a house, no one was in any of the windows. But the curtains fluttered. Being watched, he realized. Garrett stopped and glared at one window. Fine, he muttered, knocking on the door. Go away, came the answer. Look, I'm tired, cold. Just go away. Garrett sighed but slogged on to the next house, but saw the curtains pulled shut seconds before he turned into the driveway. He blinked. Geez, you'd think I'd done something wrong here. He'd never stopped in the small clump of houses on his way through from High Falls and back, but as far as he could remember, they'd never been this afraid of strangers. He remembered seeing children playing outside in the yards and people going about their business. Some had even waved as he drove through. This is odd, he thought. What the hell is going on here? Garrett stopped in the middle of the subdivision, right in the middle of the road, his brows knitting. I have no idea what the hell is going on here, but I'm not leaving until I find out. His legs shook and his knees ached. The bag on his back felt heavier now than it had been when he started out. Looking up, even though there was bits of blue between the clouds, they were swiftly turning violet as the pale gray of the clouds turned to slate. Now that he had stopped pushing himself, the sweat felt like ice as well. I find shelter now, or I won't need it, he thought, pressing his lips into a thin line. There was one last house, and he trudged through the snow toward it. A low rumble in the distance, and a thin whistle pierced the silence. Garrett looked up and toward the sound, trying to place it. The rumble faded, and all that remained was the faint snapping crackle of frozen tree limbs rubbing against each other in the bush. Garrett lifted a hand to knock on the door. It was a long shot. The house appeared abandoned without even a rustle of curtain from inside. He tried the door, but it was locked tight. The temptation to break in gnawed at him, but that would cause a draft he wouldn't be able to repair. He sighed heavily, turning back to the road, scanning the horizon, looking for a decent place to set up camp. He would never make it to High Falls now, and if he didn't warm up and rest, he would never make it there at all. He would die from hypothermia first. The rumble sounded again, and this time it sounded closer, and with a mechanical whine. Like an engine laboring, he thought, his brow crinkling. Big engine, like a... The door opened so fast that Garrett stared at the old man in confusion, not even sure if he was real. Get inside, the man said. Now, before it's too late. Garrett blinked again, but released the snaps holding his feet to the snowshoes and entered the house. The man pulled him all the way in and then slammed the door shut, moving a chair in front of the door. The man picked up the snowshoes and then turned to face him. Garrett opened his mouth, but the old man motioned to a young woman who pulled him into a back room, pulling Garrett into a closet before hiding behind him in the same closet. She pressed herself right into the deepest part of the small space, using the clothes and other clutter to hide herself before sliding down the wall, trembling. What's going on? He asked. Shh, she whispered. They'll hear you. He opened his mouth, but she grasped his hand and said, Don't let them hear you. So that was chapter 4. We'll get into chapter 5 tomorrow. I'll even record chapter 6 as well tomorrow. That I have some place to be on Saturday, which means unfortunately I can't do the recording on Saturday as planned. So I will set up the videos that way each day happens the way it should. And I will be back on Sunday. So tomorrow, we're on to chapter 4. Or did I just read 4? I just read 4. What am I talking about? Okay, chapter 5. Have a great evening.